everyone. Welcome to this podcast is for women. I'm your host, Adrienne Everheart. This podcast is for women is where we delve into topics that inspire and empower women in all aspects of their lives. And today I'm going to be focusing on negotiating and communicating with a high conflict person or a high conflict personality, and how to really manage your marital or romantic relationships if you're involved with someone who is a high conflict personality, or in the past, maybe you're now in a co-parenting situation where you have to communicate with a high conflict person. I have a very special guest today. His name is Bill Eddy. He pioneered the high conflict personality theory, which is HCP. He is an expert at managing disputes involving people with high conflict personalities. So specifically, if you're feeling like you're a target of blame, you have what you consider a high conflict person in your life. But for now, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest, Bill Eddy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adrienne. Glad to be on.
It's really fabulous to have you because I had mentioned to you earlier that I discovered your work after a coaching session with a client who just kept describing her husband as being so high conflict. And I got really curious about that topic because I have some tools that I've developed to help women in high conflict situations to focus more on their feminine energy they're receiving, and to not be more of the pursuer or trying to solve the problem. But I got really curious about high conflict. I did a quick search and I came across your podcast. It's a great podcast. I suggest everyone check it out. And then I went and got your book and I started deep diving into the high conflict personality. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about more about what makes up a high conflict personality or person?
Well, really, we define it as primarily four things. One is a preoccupation with blaming others. And along with that is not taking responsibility. It's not my fault, it's all your fault, that kind of thing. Second is a lot of all or nothing thinking. It's not just all your fault and not mine, but the solutions are just one way. It's got to be this way. It's my way or the highway kind of thinking, all or nothing thinking. Third is often unmanaged emotions. The emotions take over. Now, for some people, this doesn't show on the surface. They can look calm and reasonable, but inside they're trying to get revenge or they're trying to give someone else a hard time in their actions. But for some people, it's right on the surface. They yell, scream, run out of the room in the middle of a conversation, those kind of unmanaged emotions. And the fourth is extreme behavior, things that we find that 90% of people would never do. Now, there may be a pattern here of doing extreme things, but sometimes just one extreme thing. Someone punches a hole in a wall or spreads a terrible rumor on the internet. 90% of people don't do that. And so that's a personality pattern with those four characteristics. So, and some people say, well, maybe, I was high conflict yesterday. Well, we think of high conflict with those four characteristics. If it's a pattern that repeats and repeats, then we think of high conflict personality. It's part of who they automatically are, and you have to adapt how you deal with them, because just reacting to them can make things worse or at least not make things better.
One thing that I had learned in by listening to your podcast and reading your books is that when we're teenagers or we're young people, our personalities are still developing, and that's much different than when you're an adult and your personality is kind of set. So just real quick, I want to elaborate a little bit more on those differences, but is there any changing a high conflict personality? How do we, what are some tips that we can use to dealing with them if there is any type of change possible?
Well, if it's a pattern of behavior that's really developed by adulthood. And you're absolutely right that we don't define teenagers as having high conflict personalities or personality disorders, which is the mental health term for people stuck in a difficult personality. And teenagers aren't stuck yet, but by the time they're adults, it's a consistent pattern. So if it's a pattern of behavior, it's going to be hard to change and may never change. And that's important to understand. And that's something people don't. They go, oh, I can just talk the person out of it. Well, if they have a repeated pattern of behavior, that's something that takes a repeated method of counseling or coaching to change. And it may not change a lot, may change somewhat, but the absence of change is one of the characteristics that we talk about, especially with personality disorders, which is a mental health term defined as an enduring pattern of behavior that's dysfunctional and interpersonal. Personality disorders are really interpersonal
Yes,
disorders. And that's why they show up more in families than anywhere else.
I see. It's all so fascinating because for all these years as a relationship coach, I've developed some tools for helping women with husbands or boyfriends, romantic relationships where their partner, really seems high conflict, what I would consider having a lot of these attributes. For example, discussions about whenever I ask him, when are we getting married? He shuts down, he yells at me, he creates an argument, or if I have to talk about something difficult with my partner, that he kind of storms out of the room, or he won't he won't communicate with me. I'm trying to tell him how I feel. He doesn't care how I feel. And I've always thought, do men is possibly men tend to be more high conflict than women, or what are the statistics on that? And how do we know we really have a high conflict person, or if this is just like you said, it's just a habit they've gotten into like coping with these sorts of stressful situations.
Yeah, so those are some great questions. So first of all, um, think of this as about 10% of people. And the diagnostic manual for mental health disorders says that personality disorders, about 10% of adults have a
Mhm,
personality disorder, probably worldwide.
mhm,
And it's part of the population and may have always been, is people that are much more adversarial. They see all relationships as adversarial. And
mhm,
sometimes this helps them, organize people, and often it pushes people away. In our society, especially if the extreme behavior involves violence, like domestic violence, it's really out of bounds for our society. And there's punishment and such for that. Your question about, is it more men than women?
yeah,
And the reality is it's fairly equal.
okay,
We see a lot of, like, 10% of men and about 10% of women have one or more personality disorders. Now, let me make a distinction here. Personality disorders are a stuck pattern of behavior, a narrow range of behavior, but they're not all high conflict. Maybe
right,
half of people with personality disorders are high conflict, and maybe the other half, and I'm just guessing on the half, it's not research based, but
mhm,
the other half don't blame others. They may be really hard on themselves. They may be just stuck. They may be very isolated. Um, they may be very avoidant. Avoidant people generally aren't high conflict people, although some are. The high conflict people with personality disorders are most likely the cluster B personality disorders, which is antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic. Now, each of these has, like, antisocial personality disorder. That's people willing to break the rules. They lie a lot, very aggressive, often violent. That's 3/4 male. So that one's more male than female. Like the criminal population is probably 3-to-1 male. Narcissistic personality disorder is more male, but probably more like 60/40. There's a big study done 20 years ago, said 63% men, 37% women, something like that. Borderline personality. Now, this is often thought of as a female personality disorder. Very emotional, mood swings, emotion dysregulation. But the research came out that it's almost equal. And 20 years ago, studies said something like 47% male and 53% female. The thing that we realized is men who engage in domestic violence, impulsive domestic violence, often have borderline personality traits. And so that explains that women with borderline personality may be more likely to burst into tears, yell and scream, but not necessarily be violent, although a small percent are. Histrionic personality, this is often associated with women, but the research 20 years ago showed it's around 50-50 because men also have a drive to get attention. Men also can be very dramatic. And so overall, we're looking at about fairly equal. But if you're in a relationship with somebody like this, you start going, wait a minute, something's up here. Something's out of the norm here.
Yeah.
And that's a good realization because then you need to adapt what you do.
Yeah.
So I want to give you 4 things to tell people not to do.
Okay. So just to recap, which this is, I'm in the coaching world and the YouTube world where narcissist and narcissistic are the top searched terms.
Right.
And when I discovered your work, I was, a little bit confused because it seems like narcissist and narcissism is getting all of the attention when really I think we need to be focusing on conflict, on these high conflict personalities or even high conflict personality traits that a person can have, because the answer is the same. The tips don't really change whether they are diagnosed or, it is not diagnosed and you just suspect this is what's happening. The process for dealing with this really doesn't change, and it gives you solutions so that you have a better life. So I want to just recap that because there is a difference, but there's a huge difference between those terms. But in a lot of ways, the treatment is still the same. The tips you're going to share with us.
Yeah. And I want to mention, let's talk briefly about coaching versus counseling. So for treatment with borderline personality disorder, there's a treatment that's been having a lot of success called dialectical behavior therapy, which is nicknamed DBT. And people who enter that therapy after a year or 2 or 3 may even outgrow the diagnosis. So we're very encouraged with that. If someone sees that in themselves, someone's been diagnosed with that, or sees that in their spouse, their partner, could be man or woman, there is hope. There is some good counseling for that. But that's like weekly counseling for 1 or 2 or 3 years with a therapist trained in that method. Narcissists generally don't go to therapy because they already know everything.
Yeah.
So we don't really have a lot of success with that, although some people have. There's some good counseling for that. Antisocial doesn't seek therapy at all, and they don't benefit from therapy. In fact, they may become worse with therapy because they learn how to manipulate people more.
I see.
People with histrionic personalities. And these 4 are the cluster B personality disorders, and they tend to be the high conflict personalities. So if you're looking at this, it's these personality disorders may be high conflict, maybe not, but they're very much overlap. But in terms of coaching and in terms of being in a relationship with someone like this, there's some key tips of things to avoid and key tips of things to do. So the first thing to avoid is not trying to give the person insight into themselves. And this is tricky because we really want to say, now look at yourself. Can't you see what you're doing right now? You're being so inappropriate. Can't you see this in yourself? Well, if they have a high conflict personality, not only are they not going to see it,
Mhm.
but it's going to escalate them.
Yeah.
And they're
It's
going to,
going to create more conflict,
right,
and it's going to possibly make them feel more insecure or more on the defensive or whatever triggers them. It's going to increase that if you say, "Hey, you have this problem."
right. So you don't want to do that. Instead, you want to look at your choices now. So you don't want to focus on inside of them. You want to focus outside of them. Let's look at our choices now. So you're saying, that you shouldn't have to come home on time or that whatever you're doing. And rather than saying, now look at yourself and how irresponsible you are, instead say, well, these are your choices. You know, I'm going to be ready to go out. And if you're not here on time, I'm going to leave and go where we're supposed to go together.
Mhm.
That's one of the choices. So think about that. So focus on choices, focus outward, not inward with them. A second one is avoid focusing on the past because you can't resolve the past with a high conflict person. They can't say, oh, you're right, I was wrong, I'm so sorry. Being a high conflict person means never having to say you're sorry. Um, it,
Now you're making me have like just this moment where I think of all of my clients that sounds like they have a high conflict partner, and the past is like just right here, and at any moment they grab something from the past to support the present moment. So, but you're telling us that we should not bring up the past even if they're bringing up the past.
right. Oh, and they're stuck in the past. High conflict people will endlessly talk about what you did yesterday, last month, last year, and how I was right to do everything I did and you were wrong to do everything you did. Now you admit it, you apologize to me for having
Oh
really.
no, you apologized. Oh no. Bill, I have something I tell a lot of my clients is apologize once, but don't really apologize for something that someone's saying that you did. If you don't really agree with it, you can apologize that they're feeling bad about themselves, that they're experiencing this, but you actually don't apologize for the thing. I'm not sure if that's any type of loophole or helpful.
Well, no, that is helpful. In other words, you don't want to focus on the past. You want to focus on the future.
Mhm.
And so apologies are always about the past. And with high conflict people, they blame you for something you didn't do, or maybe it was this size and they say it was this
Yeah.
size. And so you don't want to apologize for something that's not true. I was 5 minutes late. Sorry, I was 5 minutes late. That's no big deal. But to say, oh, I'm sorry, I I'm the one that made this mess. When in
Mhm.
fact you weren't the one that made this mess. It often is the high conflict person and they want to blame it on you and then have you say, I'm sorry. And you don't want to reinforce their fantasies because they have a lot of distortions of what's going on. So
And
you're
I also and I also want to add that in the meanwhile, they're getting lots of attention in the process. You're having to have hold court with them and have these arguments to them, which to most people feels incredibly draining and
Yep.
stressful. But it seems like to the high conflict person, they're having a great time.
Yeah, because it's sad in a way because they don't grieve and heal the past like 80 or
Mhm.
90% of people do. So they can't, quotes, get over it. So what they try to do instead is rewrite the past and try to get you to agree with them that they did nothing wrong and the fault belongs all to you. And then they feel better. But that's not reality. is everybody makes mistakes. It's okay to make
Mhm,
mistakes. Just
mhm,
admit your mistakes and move forward, but they can't do that. So that's why you don't want to focus on getting them to apologize. And you don't want to focus on apologizing if it's something you didn't do. So instead, you want to focus on the future, focus on let's look at our choices now. Let's look at what we can do now.
mhm,
And I'm just not going to discuss the past. And so that's a second thing that'll help you. A third is not opening up emotions. And so when you're really upset and you're saying, how do you feel? Or you should feel bad, or you're too angry, or you too this or that. And focusing on emotions is a dead end with high conflict people because they have a hard time managing their emotions.
mhm,
So if you open up their emotions and say, well, how did you feel about that thing you did yesterday?
mhm, mhm.
You're going to get a lot of negativity.
Okay, so I'm having an aha moment because a lot of my clients, I teach I feel statements. I feel, I'm feeling, I felt. And I always tell them that a man may throw your feelings out the window because none of us can constantly entertain or be available or say the right thing to everyone's emotions all the time. This is part of being human. But if you have a guy that regularly is throwing your emotions out the window and you're coming to him with maybe instead of I feel, but maybe I feel disguised as some sort of blame or some sort of like a lot of emotions. You're saying that a high conflict personality or person can't really, they don't know how to manage that, or do they get overwhelmed, or what happens in that moment?
Well, what happens is they have a lot of unresolved emotions. They have a history of this and that's gone wrong. So situations remind them of other situations. And they often escalate things and say, well, you left the cap off the toothpaste. Well, yeah, but last year you didn't even buy the toothpaste. And, this whole relationship's based on you being insensitive to me.
Mhm,
And it just grows so big you can't resolve it. And that's what emotions are big often.
mhm,
So you want to keep the emotions small and manageable. So don't open up emotions. Don't focus on emotions. Focus on what to do and how to think. So say, let's think about what our choices are now, rather than how do you feel about the situation or whatever. And none of this stuff is easy because it's a real shift. Our culture has very much been emotion focused for the last 50, 60, 70 years because of therapy and all of that. And that can be good for 80 or 90% of people. Talking about feelings in relationships can be a really great thing. With 10% of people, it blows things up.
yeah.
And so that these are things of like people are married to someone like this or whatever, is it helps to know. Don't focus on emotions. Focus on what to do, how to think, communication skills without trying to process emotions all the time. And high conflict
Mhm,
people want to process emotions all the time because they're stuck. But that's not the way that they get unstuck. And also, it's like with apologies, you can apologize about the past, but if you don't change how you deal with things in the future, then nothing's going to change. So you
mhm.
want to put your energy into the future rather than the past, rather than emotions, rather than insight. And the
Excellent.
last thing is don't tell them you think they're a high conflict person, that you think they have a personality disorder, that you think that they're a narcissist. All these labels just trigger defensiveness.
Oh, some great, great tips. We'll definitely have to kind of touch more on those and unpack those because there are so many little nuggets of wisdom in terms of dealing with your partner who may or may not be a high conflict
Right.
personality, but they have traits of this, and it's showing through on a consistent enough level that you need some tools to help you handle it. One of the things you said, well, several things you've said, I can find so many correlations to that feminine, masculine energy balance, which is what my work is about. in the relationship, and the high conflict person, can't handle the emotions, gets too overwhelmed. And you're saying to focus on thinking. And this is really what I get women to do in their feminine energy. You're the feeler, you're instinctive, you're having the sensing and all of these things. Whereas you want to really have it so that your guy can problem solve and be in that masculine energy space of problem solving. And one of my favorite scripts that I use is I feel, which is about me. I feel, and I don't want to put any pressure on you. I don't want to tell you what to do. You're taking all the pressure off of them. But then say, well, what do you think? And then you're presenting them with that problem solving opportunity. Would a statement like this work with, say, like maybe a high conflict personality?
Well, I think you can do what you're saying. In other words, you can say what you're feeling in a managed way, but put the focus on what to do. So you could say, I feel ignored when you come home and open the fridge and open a beer and go in front of the TV and don't say hi. So I feel ignored, and I'd like you to say hi before you settle in front of the TV or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you focus on what to do rather than saying, I feel ignored. In fact, I feel disrespected. In fact, I feel like you don't even care about me. What do you feel? Is that what you feel? You don't want to do it that way. It's not, that's going to blow up. But if you can say I feel, but then focus on what to do.
I like
And
that.
ideally we do that in 90% of marriages where you can talk about feelings, is you still say, this is what I'm feeling. Let's look at what we can do about it. You can go deeper um, with people who don't have high conflict personalities, unless they get some counseling and are willing to work on themselves. But some people realize they're in a relationship with a high conflict person and want to manage that and stay married. Let's say they've got, the child's 16, they're going to graduate high school in a couple of years. I can ride this out for a couple of years, then decide whether to stay together or not. But part of how you manage that relationship is to keep the focus calm, keep it focused on what to do rather than opening up emotions. So you can acknowledge emotions without opening up more.
I see. I love that. This is in alignment. Again, what drew me to your work, why I felt like it would be such a great thing for all of my clients, my audience to know about, is that there are so many similarities in how to handle a high conflict personality, a high conflict situation that you might be going through, where you're not going to get so much emotionally involved. You're going to have what you call limits, and I call boundaries.
Yeah.
And that is, I'm putting a limit on how much I'm going to engage with you, or how many words I'm going to say to you, or how many sentences. I teach a lot of my clients that I want you to plan out what you want to say, cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, because it really gives a lot less ammunition for a potentially high conflict person to kind of chew on. You're coming to them very fact based.
Yeah.
Uh, mhm.
No, I think it sounds great. And I think the thing is, it's not always easy to do, but if you practice this, it gets easier and easier. And
Absolutely.
that's some of the tips and tools that we teach people are uncomfortable at first, but with practice, you can get better and better at them. And they help you sometimes acknowledge emotions, but focus on what to do. Um, and I think you're probably going to ask me about that, but the approach
Absolutely.
the approach of keeping things brief, informative, friendly, and firm
Yes,
seems to
yes,
really help.
yes. And before we get too deep into Biff, because this is an amazing book, and you actually have a new book out that is about co-parenting. If you are divorced, or even if you're in a situation where you're co-parenting, there it is. It's really going to help you communicate with your partner, similar tools, but focused more for that sort of situation. And so many of my clients are, previously married, or they have children, or they're in a co-parenting situation and wanting to manage that, what I call drama.
Mhm.
Previously, it was just drama. Now I see it as conflict. It's a higher level than normal of conflict. It's an intensity, and a quick reactions, and it is usually more angry. I've noticed with women, they do feel anger, but again, it's more of that, what we considered that, I guess, Victorian era histrionic personality for a woman, where she's fainting and things like this. And truly, I think women, we can be a little more closer to the surface with our emotions in a lot of ways. But the women I work with are powerful dynamite women. They're much more like, I guess, like Spock. They're more intellectual. They're more focused on problem solving, and they move in and kind of do the work for the guy. And when you come in to the relationship with that masculine energy source, and you're saying, "Oh, I can fix this. I know how to solve this," then you result in some sort of drama. The man maybe doesn't want to be challenged or told what to do. And so I have a few phrases that for my clients, which one is, I don't do drama.
Uh-huh.
And it's just a way to share with your partner. I don't do drama.
Good.
And another term is really, really get him, which is whatever it seems like they're going through, whether they're like, "Oh, this is feeling so, I can't believe you just said this to me," or, "Oh, I can't believe you're talking about this again," or whatever it may be, that you're able to just read the situation, name one emotion, like, "Oh, you must be feeling so exhausted
Mhm.
by this situation." So you're relating to them. And I loved learning about ear. Will
Uh,
you tell us about your version of this, which is ear?
yeah,
Like,
so ear, EAR, you can
mhm.
remember that, there's something to
Yeah,
do with my ear.
yeah.
Stands for empathy, attention, and respect. And we talk about ear statements. And I developed this with high conflict people because they would get so agitated and are looking for what's a quick way to calm them. And
Mhm.
so by naming an emotion, a single emotion's really good. So empathy, you could say, I can see that you're really exhausted, or I can see that you might be feeling exhausted. That way you
Mhm.
don't say, I know what you're feeling, but you
Mhm.
might be. Or I can see you might be really disappointed by this news, or you might be really frustrated by this situation. And so usually people go, yeah, you get it, and they calm down. So that's empathy, that you might be feeling this or going through that. That's their experience. Attention is, tell me more. I want to understand. You've got my attention now.
Mhm.
Let's talk about this. Now you're not opening up emotion. Don't say I want to understand what you're feeling, because that opens up emotion.
Right.
Instead, I just want to understand the situation. And they'll tell you, well, this happened, but they'll feel listened to, they'll feel heard if you say, I'll pay attention. And then
Mhm.
respect is, and especially men like to hear that they're respected for some
Mhm.
reason. The work you do, the energy you put in, your suggestions, your relationship with our daughter or our son. So I respect all these things. So what's interesting is any of these three tend to calm down upset people. They don't have to be a high conflict person. This can be anybody who's angry, sad, hurt, whatever, um, can help them calm down because they feel acknowledged, like somebody gets what's going on with me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that brings it to a more manageable level. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying emotions are bad. I want to make sure that is managed emotions are very good and can be very helpful in solving problems. It's the extremes that we want to calm down. And ear statements My experience is 90% of people, even high conflict people, will calm down within about 30 seconds if you give them an ear state and say, "Wow, I can see how exhausted you might be feeling." But I like getting might in there so that they don't feel you're
I
saying
see.
know what
I
they're
see.
doing.
I always tell women, I let him correct you because he'll feel good. Like if he gets to correct you, like, no, I'm not upset. I'm just, I'm a little tense after work. Let them, because that, I guess that would go into the attention part of it, is
Yeah,
that they're being able to engage with you a little bit and get some attention. Because I feel like attention, I try to break everything down into one sentence or less. Like if I was using the ear
keep it
method.
simple. Yeah,
And attention's a tough one in that I feel like high conflict personalities really want that attention. They just want to soak it up. And you have to be careful because they'll kind of pull you back in, just when you're getting out, they pull you back in with something that you maybe said in the past. And you just want to keep refocusing, it sounds like, back on the situation. So let's say you have an individual that you're going to use an ear statement and you're halfway through it and they interrupt you, which if I recall correctly, interruptions are a big part of the high conflict
yeah.
personality. They want
Oh,
to interrupt you.
you be in
What is
charge.
behind the interruption? Sorry. What is behind it?
They want to be in charge, and so they
Ah,
want to dominate the conversation. And especially if you're getting uncomfortable, they want to control the conversation to steer it away from uncomfortable stuff into stuff that
okay.
they feel strong about or they feel more powerful in. So it's not unusual. And what you're saying raises an important issue, and that is you can give an ear statement fairly quickly, just a sentence or two that
Mhm.
shows, I have some empathy for what you're going through. But don't linger there because then they can manipulate that. And don't
Okay.
say, "Oh, I'm so sad to hear that." And then they'll say, "Well, if you're sad to hear that, then you'll sign this paper here, and give me everything I want." So don't overdo empathy, attention, and respect. Make a statement that shows that, maybe even a couple statements. Then focus on what to do, especially if they're starting to manipulate you and say, "Well, if you did care, you'd let me do X, Y, Z."
Mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm.
and you say, "I really care about you. I really want to help, but I'm not going to be, taken advantage of here."
I see.
So
I see.
don't overdo it. Move
Don't
into,
overdo it.
yeah, your statement, and then let's look at our choices now. Uh,
Mhm, mhm.
if you're starting to
Silence
feel
is a
manipulated.
silence is a big one I teach too. I'm like, zip it so the other person can then feel, they're having some say. It's some equal ground. So I have a few wild cards I'd love to ask you about, and then I would
Sure.
love for you to tell us anything you would like to tell us about BIF, because this is an acronym. It's incredibly valuable. I want everyone to stick around and learn this inside and out. Get this book. I'm going to have all the links below to your podcast and just to learn more about you and how to get your books. These are a couple of scenarios that I have found with my clients. I want to share them with you.
Sure.
And if you were in a situation where you were, you know, you do a lot of mediation and you teach people how to do this, but if you were in this sort of situation in a more romantic or marital relationship, just some tips on how to handle these. Is that okay?
Sure. I'm all
Okay,
ears.
here we go. So we have the husband and wife, where the wife has told the husband, I want you to tell me how you feel. And so the husband says, okay, here's how I feel. And he then reads her the riot act, which is everything about that's wrong with her personality from A to Z. And she says, these are, terrible things. This is hurtful speech that you're using with me. And he says, well, you told me you wanted me to tell you how I feel.
Yeah.
Help us out with that one.
Well, I think it's too open-ended, and that high conflict people, but to some extent everybody, if you kind of open up big, there's a much more of a risk of getting into a conflict, something that's not going to be that comfortable. So, for example, my wife says, Bill, we have to talk.
Oh no.
Panic goes through my body. And then, yeah, we have to make a decision about, which show we're going to go to next week. And it's like, oh, whew, what a relief. So I have this saying, and that is keep the conflict small. And so if you want to know how somebody feels, try to focus it more around a narrower issue, like how you feel about how Johnny's doing in school, or how you feel about taking a vacation this summer.
I see.
So by keeping it more focused, see, the thing is, feelings are wonderful and can be some of the best parts of our lives, but they need to be able to be managed. And so you don't want to just open things too wide. You want to stay focused. So managed emotions is what we teach. We don't teach no emotions. We teach managed emotions, but that includes not opening up high conflict people's emotions.
I see. So I love this because I'm just imagining phrases such as, how do you feel about getting married next June? Or how do you feel about this very specific thing I'm asking you about? Instead of, why don't you want to get married? Why haven't we gotten married? Tell me how you feel about marriage. It's much more broader. Okay. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Love it.
keep it focused. It's also not a criticism or a challenge. It's more like, I do want to know, so, what do you think about getting married next summer? Um, I want to know.
All right, here's wild card number 2.
Okay.
Um, I have a client whose husband is very quick to start up. So she might say something to him and he just fires back, like very angry, very quickly. And she'll say to him, like, you're being angry with me again. Like, stop it. And he will reply, okay, I have emotions. I'm not a robot. Help us out with this situation.
Well, here's where an ear statement might come in handy if she can be prepared with that. So she says whatever she says, and he comes back all aggressive and upset, is to be able to say, "Oh, I can see that this was a disturbing question. Um, is there something? Is this a good time? Is there something I need to know about not discussing this or whatever?" So that rather than arguing with him, is putting out some empathy. And that's so disarming. We talk about the idea of disarming a narcissist. So actually, with narcissists, the respect part's what they like the most.
I see.
And so you can say, well, I respect your time, or I respect your concerns, or I respect your feelings, and I just want to understand them some more. Those kinds of things. So don't defend and argue, but put out empathy, attention, or respect, and then you're more likely to get a calmer conversation. So generally, when someone comes across too aggressive, it's a sign that they need an ear statement rather than an argument.
I see. I see. So they're already in that sort of excited or aggressive place, and just kind of meet them with the ear statement and see if the level can't be turned down on that a little bit. And then if not, you've talked a lot about in your podcast about limits. Could you give us an example of a limit with, say, a high conflict husband, or let's say you and the kids are by the pool, you're having a great time, and your partner is suddenly raging and upset and everything's wrong, and you're out in public, or maybe even at home in private. How would you handle that in a way you don't want to leave your marriage, but at the same time you want to let this high conflict partner know, we're not going to endure this, we're not going to be around this sort of behavior.
Yeah, I think you can say, like a quick ear statement, wow, honey, I can see you're really upset about this. This is something we should discuss, but not here. And if you keep discussing it here, I'm going to take the kids and leave. So
Great. That's
so
great.
that's and we think of setting limits with two steps. So you say what the limit is if you keep
Mhm,
talking like this, and then
mhm,
say what the consequence is that I can control. And
mhm,
I can control, then I'm going to leave with the
mhm,
kids because
mhm,
I can't say, then you have to leave because he'll say,
mhm.
well, I won't. Now
Right.
you're
So we're
helpless.
using some if-then logic. If, fill in
Right.
the blank,
Exactly.
then. Okay.
It's
Excellent.
exactly that. If
Excellent.
then, if this limit isn't followed, then here's what I'm going to do.
Very good. Very good. This has been, I mean, a wealth of information. I know everyone is going to just really relish this conversation that I've had with you and explore more. Tell us a little bit about Biff and your new book that's coming out here or is available now.
Yes, yes. The BIF for co-parent communication is available now. It's a green cover. That's this one. It's the same method. Each of these books has almost 30 examples
Mhm.
of conversations. So first, BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So
Yeah.
brief is usually you're responding to some hostile or misinformed statement that may go on 2 or 3 pages, like a long email. Brief is typically a paragraph. And so a paragraph usually is sufficient to respond to most hostile emails or misinformed emails. Informative just focuses on information. So if the person says, Bill, you're a stupid idiot, you don't understand anything, you don't know what you're doing, and I want you to come and meet me for lunch at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And so a BIF response would say, first of all, it's brief, would say, for your information, I'm not available tomorrow at 1, but let's look at maybe we can meet sometime next week. So that's informative.
And you're being friendly. You're saying, well, I can meet you next week, you know?
And that's the friendly. Yeah. So brief,
Yeah.
informative, friendly. And I would like to meet with you. I want to say, but I don't, you're being a real jerk to me. Why should I even
Yeah.
meet with you when you talk about me this way? But I just ignore all of that. And I'll tell you, it
Mhm.
takes practice.
Oh, yeah.
We teach this to people. We've got videos and books and all that. Um, it's a simple method, but it takes some practice. And the last is firm. And firm doesn't mean harsh. It just means you end the hostilities so that you don't put any hooks out there like, what do you think of that, buddy? Because then the other person goes, well, I'm not the idiot, you're the idiot. And that
Mhm.
just goes downhill. So brief, informative, friendly, and firm, typically a paragraph, just straight information, no defenses. You don't need to defend yourself to a high conflict person because it's usually more about a fantasy in their head about you rather than what you're really doing. So by being information focused, you show that you're not defensive. I
Mhm.
don't have to get defensive here because I know it's not about me. Then friendly, like, thanks for letting me know your concerns, and then give your response. And
Mhm.
firm, you don't leave any hooks there. It's short and sweet. Maybe, have a good weekend, or here's some information. I hope we won't have to use this, or whatever it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
So you can set limits in a BIF and just say,
I
if you
love
keep
it.
doing this, I'll do that. I hope that won't be necessary. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, in my world, I teach women to be warm. And I think that's the equivalency of friendly because a lot of
Mhm.
times, they get into a big falling out with their guy or their ex and he starts coming back around. And I'm like, well, now's your chance to rebuild and you want to be warm, but you want to set those limits. You're not here to just endure an endless amount of bad behavior. And at some point, you have to make a decision. Am I going to continue to handle this relationship because it can be very exhausting. You talk about emotions are contagious and how it's so easy to get to bite that bait and just get really caught up in another person's drama. Now, do you have any tips on, other than practice and being prepared? Do you have any other things that you want to share with us about that emotional contagiousness and deciding to keep working on something or keep coping with it the best you can?
I think in many ways that because emotions are contagious, you want to not absorb the other person's emotions, but communicate in a way that you want them to communicate. So if you're calm, so someone's starting to get agitated, especially a high conflict person, if you're calm and you can say, we can handle this. Let's look at some
Oh, I love
solutions
that.
to our
Yeah.
choices here is you can be the voice of encouragement, the voice of empathy, attention, and respect, the voice of problem solving. And I like what you're saying about masculine and feminine parts, because it really is, all of these are about how to manage fitting them both together. Because we do need empathy. We do need people to care, to have emotions, and we need emotions to come back towards us. But if it gets too big, it can't happen. So that's by keeping it calm, keeping it managed, we can have mutual respect, mutual caring. The more you understand, the more you can develop ways of dealing with difficult people. And it doesn't have to be hopeless. It's more a question of managing rather than changing or giving up. But sometimes you do have to separate. So we'll see what happens. The work we do, we see people change and we see people try new things, and that's so encouraging. It's really, our business is exploding in terms of people really looking at how to solve conflict. And reasonable people want to keep conflict small and manageable. And that's most of who we end up working with. And my guess is that's a lot of who listen to your show. So I want to give
Yes.
you encouragement too. I think you have a lot of good messages for people.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, thank you again for being on my show. I really cannot recommend your work enough. Whether, women come to me and say, how can I be more feminine at work? How can I solve these sort of conflicts? Or I have this going on. How can I be in my feminine energy? And I love how both of our answers are really about just problem solving and also being
Mhm.
empathetic or being warm and finding what you feel, being secure with that, but also having those boundaries and those limitations. Now, are there any other words that you want to share with us? Any final thoughts you want to share with my audience before we go?
Um, well, I'll be a little self-promoting here.
Yes.
We have a couple other books I'll tell you about. We have one that's called Calming Upset People with EAR, with examples for families, workplace, etc., of the ear statements we've been talking about. And I have a brand new book that's coming out in June. And the name of it is Our New World of Adult Bullies. And bullies are the highest of the high conflict people. And I talk about them in families, intact families, separated, divorced families. I talk about them in the workplace. I talk about them in communities. I talk about them in history and politics.
Wow.
So I think it's to me it's fascinating because in this book I have 60 examples, mostly of how people set limits on bullies.
Yes.
Although some of them, unfortunately, limits weren't set or things got out of control, but it helps people learn how to spot bullies
Mhm.
before they really enter your life.
Now, I will tell everyone I've been giggling throughout this whole podcast episode because I think some people respond to high conflict very different than other people. And that's just the final thing. Not everyone gets, super charged up depending on the situation. But to me, I think when you're really versed in your boundaries and you're secure with who you are, and you are a little more focused on problem solving, you're a little more fact based. You sometimes see high conflict people as amusing. they're kind of funny, they're kind of silly, or you get, it's a little bit mildly entertaining. Not that you want to be living with it or anything, or be married to it or anything like that. So I hope I don't want to offend anyone by all my giggles, but some of this stuff is really kind of funny to me because it's just it's so bizarre at times how conflict can be with people.
Well, I could just mention that high conflict personalities drive a lot of our entertainment. If you think of TV shows, movies, etc., they often are about high conflict people doing ridiculous things or extreme and terrible things. The thing
Mhm.
is, it's really great for entertainment, but that's not the way you want to live your own life.
No.
So that's the key. Keep it on the screen and not in the house.
Yes, for Netflix, not in the
Right,
house.
right, right.
Well, Bill, thank you so much again for being on my show. I've really appreciated having you, and I hope you come back again.
I'm glad. I enjoyed working with you, and you're a delight to work with and a good communicator. So I look forward to meeting again.